On to tossing grenade the windmills. Windmills.
Precyber by T.C. Ricks and Ken Leitner. Chapter 43. Clark was not ninja material. Despite the people he'd associated with, Clark had picked up more skills in explosives and tactics than skullduggery. Still, it had seemed easy enough in the movies. Plus, given Roger's reaction, Clark had wanted to avoid involving anyone from the Revolution in the errand. This was his personal fight, not theirs. Plus, if Roger blew a gasket and decided to turn in Clark, at least no one else from the Revolution would get caught. And in the deepest part of himself, Clark wanted to prove to himself that he was the real deal and not just a poser. The office was located at the corner of Piedmont and Forest Hill. It was in a deceptively run-down office building that looked almost vacant from the outside. But the place had clearly been lofts at one point, but had been recycled at least half a dozen times. The bizarre neo-retro 60s look of the place was replicated in a few places that predated Clark. At one time, this place had probably been a pretty nice place to work. As it was a lot bigger than someone like Lyson would need. There were zombie terminals doing electronic surveillance, electronic gear, drones, and filing cabinets all over the place. It cast all kinds of ominous shadows, leaving plenty of places to hide. Nice to know if things got hairy, but that also made Clark look all over the place constantly for fear something might be lurking in them. Unfortunately, opening the door proved more difficult than he had originally anticipated. He jiggled the doorknob and tried to pick the lock with his pocket knife. Nothing. Then he tried kicking it down. Nothing. Well, except that he hurt his foot. A lot. After the pain subsided, he considered a new plan and then tried to break the glass on the nearby window. The stupid new glass window did not budge until he grabbed the fire extinguisher and had at it. Clark was quite pleased with himself until he realized that he might taint the scene evidence-wise. He slapped himself in the head and then climbed through the windowsill. Sometimes one had to think like a revolutionary, not a government employee. Clark began to look around, but without much success. Then he heard a sound behind him, crunching glass. "What the hell?" The outraged cry behind him revealed Lyson Burr himself. Clark was surprised that Lyson had not immediately reacted, but until that Lyson could not see him in this part of the office. Clark quietly drew his gun and then crept along the wall. What was he going to do? What if Lyson was not actually guilty of what Roger suspected? Could Clark just kill him in cold blood? Clark suspected that he could not. "What the—" Lyson's anger turned to fear as he saw Clark. Clark whirled around the corner and pointed his gun at Lyson. "You!" "Hey, it wasn't personal." What wasn't personal? Clark had no idea, but he decided to bluff. "It was personal to me. I had orders to have you killed. I pass them on. I just did my job. Please don't shoot me." Clark rolled his eyes. This guy was an idiot. While Clark rolled his eyes, Lyson tackled him. Clark pulled the trigger in self-defense, only to realize that he had left the safety on. For several seconds, the two rolled back and forth, grappling the gun. Clark let go of the gun and punched Lyson in the face. Lyson's nose made a satisfying crunching sound as he yelped in pain. Lyson dropped Clark's gun and began to run to the exit. Clark got up to run after him, but slipped in some of Lyson's blood on the carpet. The mixture of precious bodily fluids and polyester made a surprisingly slippery chemical cocktail. Lyson stopped a moment upon realizing Clark's folly and ran back to grab the gun. He picked it up, pointed at Clark, and pulled the trigger. Lyson had also forgotten to take off the safety. Clark got up again, using Lyson's desk as leverage, and tackled Lyson, hitting him again and again. Lyson fell backward into the broken glass, shrieking in pain as he suffered multiple cuts along his back. Lyson started to stumble up and glared at Clark. "You're dead! You hear me? Do you hear me? Dead!" "Really? 'Cause I think you just admitted to me that you hired men to have me killed and that you pulled a gun and tried to kill me." "I'd kill you now if your stupid gun worked." Clark shook his head. "Heck, I can just turn you out of the police now." "I was only following orders." illegal orders. My word versus yours! They'll never believe you! Clark smiled and pointed at his cell phone. There was at least one advantage to playing drama. Smart people knew that when the chips were down, you hit record. Lyson shrieked in rage and threw a chunk of glass at Clark, only to miss. Lyson did cut his hand in the process. Clark pointed to the phone again. Suddenly Lyson had a look of terror in his eyes, the kind of look that only the truly guilty knew. Lyson ran for his life. With Lyson gone, Clark began searching the office for anything usual. He checked the desktop first, but everything on there was fairly mundane, almost as if Lyson had set it up that way. Clark could not believe Lyson spent his day doing divorce cases and background checks, but that was all he found on the computer. Lyson had a spacious office for sure. Clark wandered about, wondering if there might be some secret door to some inner sanctum. How exactly did you check for secret doors? It might take 10 to 20 minutes along just to knock on the walls. He started with the simple stuff. He looked behind the artwork hanging on the walls. He looked under the sofas and the comfy chairs. He searched the bar area, and he even checked the walls for seams just in case there was a secret room. He did find a steel-lined panic room, but it was not so secret, and only had food inside. Clark took a small sample to snack on while he searched the rest of the office. Clark was guessing he had plenty of time and that Lyson would not call the police, so he went slow and careful. Even so, after 40 minutes of searching, he found himself back to where he'd started, sitting at Lyson's desk, staring at the main terminal, trying to decide his next move, and began to feel some time pressure. However, as he leaned back, his hand rubbed across the armrest and felt a small notch. He looked closer and found a small panel set in the armrest of the chair. Inside the tiny compartment, he found a thumb drive. Clark pocketed the drive and noticed a key underneath it. The key looked like the short file cabinet key that he had discovered in the desk drawer. However, this one seemed to have some electrical contacts on it as well. Clark decided to try it on the file cabinet, even though he'd rifled the contents of it. When Clark inserted the key, the mundane-looking oak-grain file cabinet popped out a small touchpad screen. The screen displayed the following prompt. Please enter your voice print code now. Clark frowned. Hacking a voice print lock would take hours, and Clark had already been here too long. He had guessed correctly about the police, but someone was bound to cause trouble eventually. Clark decided on the low-tech approach. He toppled the file cabinet over. Apparently, Horseclash was rubbing off on him. The wood splintered on impact, revealing a hidden compartment on the back side. The compartment was steel and very much locked tightly. Clark kicked the area repeatedly until the small lockbox hung by one thin electrical cable. Clark supposed it was possible that disconnecting it might damage the contents, however he decided not to worry. He used his combat knife to slice the wiring, grabbed the secret lockbox, and left. Back at Gabriel's place, Clark examined the two items he'd retrieved. He let Horace work on the lockbox while he took over the data on the thumbnail. Horace produced a hobby rotary cutting tool from somewhere and began slowly, carefully cutting the box open. Clark sat down at an isolated desktop and plugged in the thumb drive. According to Gabriel, the shadow net was too important to risk exposing to any outside data. It was too important for even the slightest risk of a virus, spyware, or malware. Plus, Clark suspected that this particular drive might have some intentional protective malware on it. Sneaky people like Lyson had it as a matter of course. The thumb drive contained encrypted data, which was something of an inconvenience to Clark. He recognized the format and used some freeware apps to read the header. The header showed 1024-bit encryption key, which in turn encoded using a 256-bit public-private key. No one had solved the factoring problem with public-private keys, so a 256-bit key would take a few billion years to solve. Idly, he wondered if the quantum computers back at HQ could do that. He'd heard that they were good at decryption, but he could check later if he needed it. He wanted answers. Clark tried attacking the 1024-bit key with some hackware he had on hand. It analyzed the data for patterns and then attempted to guess the encryption code. It started running, but the display gave no indication as to how long it would take to solve. Clark knew from past experience it might work in a few seconds, or it might well take months. After checking with Gabriel, Clark found that the shadow net could not, in fact, automatically break all existing codes. Otherwise, they would have won a long time ago. That made sense. Clark decided to check on Horace while it ran. He could set up a few CPUs together to speed things up, but he would have to isolate the ring. He decided to let the process run a bit before taking that much effort. He found Horse, who had cut his way into the lockbox and was using a small mirror to look inside before lifting the lid. He had to admit Horse knew how to break into things. A few moments later, Horse decided it was safe and lifted the lid. Inside, they discovered a journal, a small folded paper, and the smallest automatic pistol they had ever seen. Horse grabbed the journal and started thumbing through it, so Clark took the folded paper and opened it. Clark smiled as he realized the sheet contained Lyson's list of important passwords. He turned to type Shiny Leather 45 into the hackware so he could view the contents. He planned to use the online social networking site passwords later for fun. The thumb drive contained financial records, phone records, and archived email records. It would take Clark days to fully analyze everything, but he decided to search on Balthazar and check the recent entries tonight. The search turned up one entry. It showed a phone log with Carl and the note, Accepted Assignment. Clark checked the date. Lyson had made the call a week before Barfman had died. Clark turned back and wept with joy. Here was the thing for which he had searched, for which his life had been turned upside down. This man Lyson had arranged to kill Barfman. Carl had carried out the order. All that remained was to find out who had paid Lyson. "Hey, Clark?" asked Horse. "Some woman named Bertie Bartowski wrote this journal. It's almost as funny as your dad's friend's name." "What, Bertie? That was his mother's name." "Lyson had a journal from Barfman's mother?" replied Clark. They both huddled over the journal and carefully reread the name on the outside cover to cover to confirm Horse's assertion. Clark stood up, beaming with happiness, and exclaimed, "We've hit the mother lode! I think I'm going to celebrate. Where's that bottle of scotch we have hidden around here?" Horse grinned ear to ear and produced the bottle from under his chair. He hit the top of it against the table, shattering the neck. Horse drank from the jagged opening he created and then offered the bottle to Clark. They drank for hours. Gabriel peeked in after the first 15 minutes, found out the good news, and came back with another bottle of whiskey. The information they had could make a real difference, and they knew it. The next morning, Clark sat at his desk with his expected hangover and reviewed the thumb drive data for the most recent records to the oldest. Clark found many other records like the one with Carl. Lyson appeared to have eliminated quite a few enemies of his clients. But the client names were always just initials. E.N. appeared the most frequently, but there were others. Clark was not surprised to find Catherine's name frequently on the phone log. However, Clark's most shocking discovery was just before lunch, when he found the single phone log to Laban.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson. Copyright 2012.
Kenneth Leitner
and Red Anvil Amalgamated.
to fight the forces of evil.